Hi everyone. I'm really writing this out as a way to vent because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure there's anything that can be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything. I'm going to start from the beginning. This is a story 2 years in the making, so I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with my master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD. Thinking we'd make an investment, my dad and I purchased a house. The intent was to rent it out once I completed my PhD. This house was only a block away from a dive bar, where my dad was able to make some pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy in my new house because my next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy you could ever meet. So, we met the neighbor and he did seem nice enough. He suggested we exchange numbers, just in case I ever needed anything, and I thought that was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state, and I was left to my own devices. Literally the day he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away and let me know he left a gift for me on my front porch. In this text exchange, he started using pet names like Sweetie and Cutie. I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cats in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names, and I took the opportunity to make sure he knew I was not interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all a person ever needs is friends, and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me texts frequently. Everything from inviting me fishing to telling me he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply, or I would tell him I'm busy. I didn't want to be rude, but I also had no interest in any sort of relationship with him other than neighborly. One night, I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street, letting me know that if my neighbor knocked my door, I shouldn't answer. She then told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender he was hearing voices that got louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with a hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police, and the police took the hatchet from him, but made no arrest. The manager of the bar picked me up, and I spent the night at her house. She told me that the police said my neighbor was on meth. After that, I tried to keep my distance even more, but things got even weirder. One day, I went out to find my car with a squirrel in my driveway. This squirrel had very clearly been run over and moved to right in front of my driver's side door. I just stepped over it, got in my car, and left. When I returned home, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I suspect he's the one who put the squirrel in my driveway. Another time, I walked out of my house to see he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on the bricks in his front yard. He came out and told me that it was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple of months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me inviting me over, and I would come up with an excuse or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, telling me that he was watching me come and go from my house. Around Halloween, he handcrafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the last SOB who played mind games, November 2012. Like, WTF, all this time still sending me texts. Eventually, I got fed up and I stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I stopped responding completely, he threw a 50-pound flower pot at my front door. You know those big concrete planters? Yeah, one of those. I called the police, who advised me to get a stalking no contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video to my screen. I declined it twice. I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no contact order. I saw 3 different victim advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during that time, someone had attempted to break into my home. I had an ADT security system, so while that didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of COVID. I was trapped in my home, 24/7, with my stalker neighbor next door. Luckily, court proceedings for protection orders didn't stop. Right before court, he sent me a text telling me he was sorry for what he'd done, that he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then he went on to tell me he can tell my hair has gotten longer and I look beautiful. I went to court and provided all the evidence I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened, the text he'd sent me asking if I wanted a massage, the text I sent him telling him the way he was speaking to me was really inappropriate, the text saying that he knew he made me uncomfortable, and I told the judge that I suspected that he had attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. The kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said he was in recovery and was trying to turn over a new leaf. He didn't oppose the protection order at all, so in March 2020, I actually received the stalking no contract order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he had some weird stuff, but that's because he's a weird guy. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety. That is, until he got on drugs again. At this time, we found an unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect it was a warning to him. After this, and for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. He moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We're still together and as happy in our new relationship as we can be. New Year's 2021, I was awoken to yelling. I turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out his window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities, 7 minutes is a long time. He called me a harlot. He said, "Happy effing New Year." He said he was going to blow up his house with his gas line. I called the police, who responded. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove it was a violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." They left without even speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway is pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn. I always made sure my cameras were charged, all 5 of them. Yes, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard is covered. Since then, he's been seen by me and by my neighbors, talking to people who aren't there. Going outside and screaming nonsense with things like, "I have Cheerios on my necklace," or "I'll put my member in your butt." I'm not even joking. This basically brings me to last week. In the morning, I was getting ready for the day when I heard screaming. "Someone is going to die over this sweatshirt." I turned on the cameras. I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house screaming, "Are you effing proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everybody all fired up." So, I called the police. Once again, they didn't charge him with violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. The police told me that it seems like he's off his medication again. And that was that. They left. But last night, I was awoken to hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint, and they just told him to stop. And that was that. As I write this, he's outside continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. This was the one thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard, and now that's gone. All this is to say, I'm freaking tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident that he's not going to try to break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house to move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, so I don't make very much money. Renting won't work because I have 4 cats, plus my partner's cat and dog, although we have a place secured for them if necessary. Finding a place to rent with so many animals is difficult, if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's partially my fault that I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign on another mortgage, and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then, I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. I'm tired. I'm angry. So I figured I'd write this out to vent. If you made it this far, thanks for reading it all. There's still so many different instances that I've left out. I'm just so exhausted. In 2016, my girlfriend and I decided to go on our first vacation together. We booked a 3-night stay at the Belmont Hotel, not its real name, which was a historic hotel in the old part of the city. It was an elegant manor-style home from 1850s, and parts of the property looked from that period. Massive staircases, parlor room, and original furniture throughout. Our first day we did the usual touristy stuff. Exhausted, we settled into our room and crashed for the evening. Our first night we barely slept. My girlfriend and I were both uncomfortable sleeping in the room and felt like someone was watching us. A few hours later, around 3 a.m., we were abruptly woken up to a very loud sound coming from above our room. It sounded like someone was pulling or pushing a large piece of furniture. The stuttering of wood on wood and the creaking was unbearably loud. This went on ad nauseum for a while, that we were totally awake thinking someone was working upstairs, like a staff member moving furniture or rearranging the room. We were both dumbfounded, sitting upright in our beds, waiting for this to end. Second day, more touristy stuff. Didn't think much of the previous night, but the second night, we were zonked and went to sleep early. This night was strangely similar. We woke up around the same time to the exact same creaking or stuttering of furniture or something being moved around above us. It eventually stopped like yesterday, and we managed to fall back asleep. Next thing I remember is my girlfriend waking me up abruptly saying, "What are you doing?" I awoke, standing in the middle of the room in the dark, unpacking my bag angrily, throwing her clothes into the air. I snapped at her for asking me what I was doing and interrupting me. I was frustrated and agitated on waking. Suddenly, I vaguely remembered what I was doing, almost like a dream on waking and trying to hang on to your dream. I sat on the bed and explained that I was looking for a key in the room, and I remembered wandering around the room, desperately searching the walls, floors, and furniture with my hands in the dark. I was getting more disturbed the more I explained this to my girlfriend. The idea that I was alone in this dark hotel room doing this really frightened me because I had no control. Needless to say, we decided to call it early and head home and end our vacation. We drove the full 4-hour drive home that night in pitch darkness and fog. I called the hotel that morning to check out early. Speaking with the front desk, I mentioned the loud noises coming from above our room. She replied, "There is no room above yours. It's an attic space. No staff would have been up there at that time." I mentioned that it sounded like someone was dragging furniture on hardwood. She said there was lots of furniture stored up there. I asked her if the hotel was haunted. She responded reluctantly that she has heard other similar stories. When I was younger, It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother up until I was 14 years old. Every day except the weekends, my mom would drive like 30 minutes away, taking care of this family with 4 kids from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. And then at 5, she would sometimes do a night shift at a diner a little further away from that. My brother and I were homeschooled and had tutors come in 3 days a week for 4 hours every time, so we were mostly home alone, unsupervised. Our closest neighbors were like half a mile away, and no cars really ever passed us. The most I ever counted in a day was 5. We lived in a really old, crappy, and small house, and we had 3 dogs at this time. 2 German Shepherds and a Belgian Malinois, kind of the same thing as a German Shepherd, protective working dog. Our neighbor gave us when his dog had puppies. Our yard was not gated, and most days were spent outside in the porch with a fan on doing homework or reading while watching the dogs playing ball. After 5 every day, we were under strict instructions from my mom to take the dogs in and shut the blinds and everything. But sometimes if I was bored or if the dogs were energetic, I would let them out and play with them since our house was extremely small and these were some pretty huge dogs. One day that I knew my mom was working the night shift, my brother and I decided to play with the dogs, so we ran outside to grab the fetch toys for the dogs. At night, if we played, it would be at the back of the house, so my mom wouldn't know if she started to drive her car in. My brother was taking a super long time getting the toys, and the dogs were inside with me going crazy barking. So I stopped doing dishes and pulled down the blinds and look outside, and he's standing there talking to this man who seems urgently trying to rush him into his car. Right away, I start screeching at the top of my lungs and run out of my house, and the dogs run out also, since I just want to get my brother. Totoro, my smallest dog, who was 60 pounds if I remember correctly, jumped on him and he fell down and stayed on top of him barking. The 2 other dogs are barking like crazy too, and I tell my brother to run back inside, and I pull Totoro's tail and grab the scruff of his neck, and I still remember his whimpers because it hurt when I did that, and I made him go back into the house with the other dogs. I pushed our dining table to barricade the door and spent the next 15 minutes really scared and holding the kitchen knife along with the dogs who were still barking like mad. I stayed on the couch peeking through the blinds, and he looked super mad and just kept looking at our house and swearing. I was so scared he was going to come in and do something to us. He drove away pretty quickly, and I think my mom got home about maybe only 30 minutes later, but it felt so long. My brother and I told her what happened, and he told her that he stopped and asked for directions, and then started asking him if he was alone, and if he wanted to go into his car and see his puppy. My brother told him he has 3 puppies, and asked if he wanted to come in and see them, and he started leading my brother away to his car. We drove to my neighbor's house and called the cops, which drove in from the closest town out, and they questioned us, but I was 10 years old, and if I remember correctly, the only description I made was that the car was red and looked old, and he was tall and white. I talked to my mom tonight, and for the rest of the time we lived there, we would see a police car drive down the street a few times a week, and the officer that took my statement became very close with us. We had dinner together a lot, and he would drive out to our house and spend time with us if he was on patrol. We spent Christmas and Thanksgiving with his family, until I moved into California a few years ago. He even took in Totoro and my old shepherd, Ponyo, because our apartment didn't let us have 2 big dogs. We're still very close, and I see him as a dad, even though we are 5 states apart. Unfortunately, he's very sick from liver failure, and my family is flying out to see him later this week for the last time, which inspired me to tell this story. So, guy who tried to kidnap my brother, thanks for introducing me to the most loving and important person to me. I can't imagine the person I would be without him. I checked into this hotel room with my family Friday night. It's now very, very early on Sunday. A dream I had woke me up, and since I can't go back to sleep, I'm posting here. I'll start off by saying I'm generally not plagued by nightmares, and I definitely don't have auditory hallucinations. Last night, as well as tonight, laying down to go to sleep, I've been hearing whispers. Thought I was just tired, but now I think it's something more. Yesterday, my mom said I was crying out in my sleep. First night we stayed here. I was having nightmares that night. About half an hour ago, I woke up sobbing, soaked in my own tears. I had just witnessed my daughter's death and attended her funeral in extreme detail. For reference, I do have a daughter. She's 1.5 and asleep, alive, thank goodness, next to me. In my dream, she was murdered by a bomb of some sort that hurt others, but she was first impact. And if that wasn't heartbreaking enough, at her funeral, she was walking around like normal. The funeral itself was weird, as there wasn't many people, and I know for a fact that a lot would come to my daughter's. She was holding the hand of someone, but when she noticed me, she smiled and ran over. I picked her up and smelled the top of her head, as I often do in real life, and was heartbroken to realize she now smelled like embalming fluid. So I took a picture with her to capture one last memory. When I looked at it, I realized I was sitting alone. All that combined really solidified that she was really gone. It's hard to describe the feelings of hopelessness and despair and gut-wrenching profound sadness that are still lingering. Just want to say here, I'm so sorry if you've ever lost a child. I can't imagine your pain, and I'm sending you all the love. I texted my friend about it, and she definitely believes it's haunted. That thought hadn't even crossed my mind until she mentioned it. Edit. Some are interested in what hotel this was. This was Super 8 in Big Timber, Montana. Hope that helps. Also, none of my family experienced any of this. Just me. This started happening about a year ago. I'm posting this just to see if anyone knows why this is happening, or how to stop it. The first encounter was last spring, when me and my friend decided to go hiking on this trail that's about a 10-minute walk from my house. We were about a half mile into the trail when we heard it. It was a woman screaming for her life. She yelled and pleaded with us to come help her. But when we yelled back to ask if we should call someone, she didn't answer and kept repeating, asking us to come help her. I'd like to say that we immediately left the woods and called the police, but we didn't. Something in our 15-year-old minds convinced us that it would be safe for us to go check it out ourselves. We armed ourselves with rocks and headed down the trail where we heard another voice telling the woman to shut up or they would kill her. Then both voices went silent. This is when we finally called the non-emergency police line, who referred us to 911, who told us to exit the trail and wait for an officer. We did, and about 10 minutes later, one showed up. Like the police in most of these stories, they were no help, and they were very suspicious of 2 teenage girls calling in a possible homicide. They supposedly searched the whole 10-mile trail in about 20 minutes and came back and told us they found nothing, but took our names down and told us that they would get back to us if anything came up. But I guess nothing did because I never heard from them again. When I got home, I told my older sister, and this is when she told me she thought it might have been a skinwalker, a native legend that her father had told us about. The skinwalker will try to lure you by disguising itself as someone you know or who needs help. I told her that was crazy, but it still lingered in the back of my mind. The next encounter takes place a few nights later. I was walking the dogs with my sister when she looked over and sort of chuckled as she asked, "Why is that trash can in the middle of the road?" I looked past the gate of our community and I saw it. It was a white creature with skinny legs and arms, with hands that looked like claws. I told her that I didn't think it was trash can, but I didn't know what it was. It then started moving towards us in a strange way that didn't look human, but it didn't exactly look like the way an animal would move either. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my entire life. As soon as we got home, we told my mom, and she looked at us like she thought we were crazy. But when we told my dad, he looked worried, and he told us about his experience when he was camping and saw something eerily similar to what we saw. We didn't walk the dogs at night for a good amount of time until we felt like things were normal again. Nothing happened for a while and everything felt safe again. This happened in January. I'd made new friends and we were hanging out one night when one of them decided to show the rest of us a hideout that they had made in the woods. A little stupid to go out in the woods at night, I know, but it was a fine neighborhood and it felt safe enough at the time. We were walking through the woods when, suddenly, we heard someone screaming for help. It was a man this time. I had learned my lesson from last time, and I snapped at my friends to run and go back to the car. When we were back in the car, I told them about skinwalkers and my previous experiences, and they looked at me like I was crazy, until I pulled up a video of a supposed skinwalker sighting that sounded exactly like we had just heard. I didn't go to the woods at night for a while after that, but eventually I forgot it even happened and returned to the woods. The next encounter happened about a month ago. I thought it was over after those encounters, but apparently not. I was walking to the woods with one of my friends that was with me for the previous encounter when I dropped my phone. He pulled out his flashlight and helped me look for it because it was pitch black. That's when I heard it. This time a little boy screaming for help. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I had heard enough and I told my friend we should get out of there. And we did. The next encounter happened a few weeks ago. Me and my sister were walking her dog when we heard someone screaming incoherently. We yelled back to see if they needed help, but the voice just kept screaming. I told my sister we needed to go back, and we did. The most recent encounter happened 2 nights ago. Me and my friends were walking around a ditch by their house. We didn't think it would be dangerous because we had gone there at night before. We were about a half mile away from the car when we saw it. My friend thought it was just a sign, but then it moved. It was a creature with horns or arms and that it raised above its head. We could only see the outline of it because it was pitch black, except for a streetlight, but it was clearly there. It started moving towards us. We booked it to the car and went back to the house. I haven't been outside past dark since. I haven't told anyone about this last encounter over fear of scrutiny for going back to outside after what happened, but I feel like I have to tell someone. I know this isn't as scary as some of the other stories on here, but I'm genuinely fearing for my life. I don't know what this creature wants or how to get rid of it, but it feels good to get it off my chest.